Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 8 of COM 100. Dr. Erin Walton here for another fantastic week of communication theory. I hope you are all psyched for our 3-day weekend. You guys have Monday off. I hope you take it. I don't know why my arm keeps disappearing. That's really freaking me out a little bit. All right. Well, technology wins today. All right, folks. Couple of things regarding week 7. So I noticed last week there were fewer of you participating in the discussion forum, which, you know, as we sort of come into the second half of the course and really start to home stretch it, the people who are going to continue and stay strong tend to show up, and the people that are probably going to have to repeat the class fall off. So I want you to be one of the first type. I want you to say, all right, I got a few weeks left. I'm going to do this, and I want you to join me. In order to do that, however, you're going to need to do a few things. First of all, you're going to have to reach out to me and have some things opened. I sent out emails to everybody that was kind of at a not just a failing spot, but even a place where I'm like, oh, your grade makes me nervous each week. I want to get you into a safer spot. So I've sent those emails out. If you're unaware of what your grade is in the course, or you don't know what you need to submit to bring it up again, please let me know. I can take a look for you. I also want to remind you that, you know, we have some time, and the way the assignments in this course are set up, you have many attempts on a lot of different assignments, and I want to just, I don't know, encourage you to use them. It's fine to, you know, use 1 or 2 attempts and get, I don't know, like an 85, but if you could get 100% on that assignment, cumulatively, your points that you earn, those extra few points, are going to kind of add up to a bigger picture, okay? I don't know if that made sense. Basically, use all your attempts, get as many points as you can possibly get. They do tend to add up. There's a handful of you, like I said, your grade sort of fluctuates on the weekly. It stresses me out. So if that's you, you're probably going to be hearing from me with the same message. I just really want you guys to pass. So let me know what you need from me. Let's see, any other announcements? I appreciate your flexibility with me last week. The joys of, again, working in the industry is that sometimes I have to travel for various things, and hotel Wi-Fi is not always super reliable. So thank you for being flexible. Let me think. Anything else for you folks? I don't think so. I think that's pretty much the gist. So let's do a quick review of chapter 9, where last week we talked about development and organization of your presentations. And then we'll jump into chapter 10, which I love chapter 10. I love verbal and visual support. I love how it's used. I love its purpose. It's a weird thing to get nerdy about, but here we are. So let me turn off my camera and we will jump in. All right, let's review last week, my friends. Chapter 9, developing and organizing the presentation, the things I wanted you to take away. First and foremost, almost everybody is going to have to make an on-the-job presentation at some point, whether it's formal or not. It could be for internal audiences or external audiences. Either way, you're probably going to have to do this at some point. It's going to be very important to your career success that you understand how to organize a presentation. When you are getting ready for a presentation, take the time to analyze 3 things: the audience, who they are, what they know, even their demographic data. Analyze the goals of the presentation, the occasion, things like that, and analyze yourself. You know, what are you bringing to the topic? What credibility do you need to share with your audience? Things like that. And speaking of goals, I want you to understand the difference between general goals and specific goals. What place do each of those types of goals have in the organization of a presentation? Make sure you understand how to structure your main points to be clearly organized and flow from main point to main point. Make sure the thesis of your presentation is clear. This is the usually single sentence arguable phrase that's sort of the big takeaway from your presentation. Make sure you know what it is, and after you're done presenting, your audience will know what it is. Pay attention to organizational patterns. We're talking about those main points, how they are organized. What options do you have? Are you using Monroe's motivated sequence? Are you organizing chronologically or spatially, or is it an if-then type presentation? Understand the purpose for each, what you want to get out of it, and why it matters. And then, of course, don't forget the transitions. Transitions get you from your intro to your main points and back to your conclusion in a way that helps your audience follow along and helps them understand how everything connects. Okay, so that's chapter 9. Keep that in mind as you prepare for the final exam. Let's move on to chapter 10. So in chapter 10, we're talking about verbal and visual support in presentations. So the types of things that you're using that might be a little outside the main body of your content, your main content focus of your presentation, okay? The outcomes for this week, I want you to be able to define and describe the guidelines for verbal support, discuss when and where visual aids are appropriate based on setting. Think about the advantages and disadvantages of all of them, which type is going to be most effective for a specific context, and understand what makes good PowerPoint presentation. That's kind of a goal here. So let's talk about attention. Attention is a very valuable thing. I like to think of this as like this little security guard in your brain. This is how I learned about attention span, and I think it communicates it well. So I'm going to use it the same to teach you. So inside your brain bowl, dang it, your bone bowl. Why can I not? I did that last week too, didn't I? Anyway, your bone bowl. You have this little guy named Frank. We call him Frank. Frank, he sits at a desk, and his job is to observe and report. He watches his monitors. Okay, so what's on the monitors? Well, you've got everything coming in through your eyes, anything coming in through your ears, all the things you taste, anything you touch. And Frank's just he's an observe and report kind of fella. So he sees things on the monitor, he writes down the report, and he puts it in a filing cabinet. Okay, that's Frank's whole job. He's really pretty good at his job. Okay, well, that depends on the day. Sometimes Frank can be tired. Sometimes Frank can be too hungry to really see all the details that he needs to report. But for the most part, Frank does a really good job of paying attention to the monitors. Now, when he receives a report from your eyes, he's going to write it down on a piece of paper, and he's going to turn around and put it in a filing cabinet. Okay, and then he'll do the same for your ears, your taste, your touch, etc. So I want you to kind of visualize it like that. This is what's going on in your brain all the time. Now, sorry, I just realized my slides are slightly out of order. Let me fix that. There we go. So now you've got all of these filing cabinets, right? You've got stuff you saw every day, stuff you said that day, things that your mom said, things that your dad said, Disney trivia, things, make sure you don't forget, right? You have all of these filing cabinets just packed to the brim with information that Frank pulled off these screens. So when I ask Frank, which of my homework is due? Frank turns around and he goes to a filing cabinet, the yellow one in the middle, and he rustles through that filing cabinet to find the information I need, okay? Now, depending on your filing cabinets, that might be a quick search. You know, if you only have one class with one piece of homework every week, that's going to be a pretty light cabinet, and Frank can find what he needs pretty easily. If you have a lot of classes, or, you know, a lot of things due, perhaps, it's going to be harder to search it up. So what we recommend you do as educators is do your best to put information in more than one filing cabinet. So if I say something like, okay, class, I want you to write this down in your planners. Write down next week, read chapter 10. Okay, so that piece of information is now going to be stored in the homework due file, in the don't forget file, and then because you wrote it down, you might even put it in the stuff I did file. Okay, and this idea is the whole idea around visual and verbal support in presentations. Come along with me on this journey. This is a chart which shows how memory works. Now, this is for younger children, so keep an eye, or keep that in mind, that this is really based on how children learn, but adults learn similarly, okay? So when we put something in one of our filing cabinets, we are sort of coding this information. You can see a child's brain has a lot of places to code things. The brain can code it. You can code things by symbols and numbers and movements and senses. And that's a lot of the reason children learn so well and so fast, is because, one, we teach them in a way that allows them to put the information in a lot of places. So think about your ABCs. Your ABCs are symbols that are in order, that have a song with them, and sometimes even a dance if you went to a very cool kindergarten. And so the ABCs are now stored in all these different places in a child's brain. And it makes it easier to remember later. Well, adults are not as fancy, right? They don't have all of these fancy branches. We go back to the idea of the filing cabinet. But still, the idea is that if you can code information in more than one way for your audience, they are more likely to be able to recall it once they get off stage, because they're going to be able to find it in a lot of different ways. That's why as teachers, we ask you to take notes, which means you're going to hear it and you're going to write it down. I might ask you to repeat it back to me. That way you heard it, you wrote it down, and you said it, and it's going to go in all of these different cabinets, right? That's the idea behind dual coding. And that is exactly what I want you to be considering when you're thinking about why you might choose to have supporting materials in your presentation. So supporting materials help the speaker. The whole goal is that you, as the expert, are leading the charge. You are giving the information. It's the you show. And your supporting materials are going to back you up. Okay, they're going to clarify anything that might be visually confusing. They're going to make things a little more lively, so we're not just reading off of a PowerPoint. They might provide evidence and additional information. That is the goal of these visual and supporting materials, okay? Now there's a few different types of supporting materials. There's visual and verbal. Let's talk verbal. When you use verbal support, what you're doing is mostly adding clarity. Think about things like providing definitions, which would be helpful to alleviate confusion. You might give examples or stories or handy dandy statistics or data, which can help your audience kind of visualize information. You can use comparisons and you can use quotes. Any verbal support you can give to the material that is at hand is going to help your audience with clarity. Think of verbal support as clarity. And part of citing information verbally is citing your sources. I want you to remember, whenever you use anybody else's work to back up your own, you're going to need to cite the source. Whether you're giving a statistic, whether you are quoting someone directly. It is absolutely proper and very effective to cite the source for a few reasons. Number one, you want to add credibility. Okay. If I am giving a talk on, oh gosh, how to be a billionaire, and I cite Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Elon Musk, you know what? Those guys are pretty credible as billionaires. I think they may have some ideas. Okay. And because I'm citing them, I look up to the experts. And now you can put a little more faith and credibility in me as a speaker. So you want to add credibility, and you want to make sure all of the sources you include are actually credible. What I mean by that is, let's imagine I'm giving that speech about how to be a billionaire, right? And I say, Jeff Bezos says, but what happens if my audience doesn't know who Jeff Bezos is? So when you are citing your sources, you want to indicate how credible your sources are. So I might instead say, multi-billionaire Jeff Bezos has this to say. Okay, it provides a little context. And then make sure that you are restating the point of that source. One of my worst, I guess, pet peeves in public speaking is when people will cite their sources or cite information and not help me understand how it proves their point. So be like the credible Hulk, okay? Back up your information with credible sources, cite them out loud, make sure your audience understands the point of the source and how your proof or your citation helps make that point. Now, when you're using visual aids, I'm going to pause Tony. Oh, shoot, I'm going to pause Tony. I can't pause Tony. You're going to have to watch Tony. Visual aids are a little different than verbal support. A visual aid is something extra, something you can hold, something physical usually, which will help clarify your information. These types of visual support materials make your presentation much more effective and are far easier to understand than just using words. This is super important when you are trying to present information that's wildly complex. It will help complicated numbers be much easier to understand. It will definitely add interest and boost your professional image if you put some good visual aids into play. For Pete's sake. Visual aids have a lot of really good function in the business setting to show how things might look, right? So I think your textbook uses the example of an architect showing a model, or a sketch. This is what I envision. That would be very hard to describe using just words. So you would pull in a visual aid to help to show how things work, such as making a model, show how things relate to each other, like an organizational chart. So you're showing your audience this, then that, and here's how they go together. And to emphasize most of the important points. One of the things that is helpful for me is when I see a report that's full of numbers and somebody visually will point out, this is what I want you to look at, so that my brain doesn't get lost in all of the other noise, okay? So those are the types, or those are the functions of a visual aid. But let's talk a little bit about what types of visual aids are out there and what might be appropriate for you to use. Now, your textbook goes over a lot of visual aids. I have chosen some of my favorites and some of the ones I find to be the most effective. So make sure you are double checking the text to get the full array, but let's start pretty basically with some of the top visual aids out there, okay? Let's start with objects and models. Objects and models, all right? Objects, I want to talk to you about what the difference is, okay? First of all, what I have up on the screen is a heart. Now, on the left is a human heart, and on the right is a model of a human heart, okay? Objects and models will absolutely add interest to your presentation. They'll provide proof of concepts, and they'll improve your clarity, especially when you need hands-on experience. For example, if you were going to train to be a heart surgeon, right? And I wanted to show you what a heart looks like. What are you looking for? This is going to be very vital in your education. I can't imagine teaching someone how to be a heart surgeon without actually giving them something physical to look at or hold, okay? It seems crazy to me. Very useful for training. And in fact, I would say that when in the training process, both are equally as important. However, there are some key differences that I want you to be aware of. Think about the purpose of your speech. If you want your audience to learn about the anatomy of a human heart, which would you think is more effective? Do you think the actual human heart, or do you think the model of the human heart? Well, I would say the model is going to be most effective, and I'll tell you why. Because the model can be held, can be taken apart, can be passed around from student to student, can be labeled. The actual human heart, going to be a little bit trickier to do all of that. Can't bring in a human heart for every single student in class, can I? Well, people might ask questions. Once you dissect open that human heart, you're going to have a hard time using it again. And then people are really going to ask questions. What are you doing with all these human hearts? You're using all the human hearts, right? Models are a little bit easier to get down to the nitty gritty. You can show, for example, here the different veins and ventricles where they might be difficult to see on the object. So there are times when a model might be more appropriate than the actual object. There, of course, is going to be times when the object is better, right? If my purpose is just to show you what a human heart looks like, or to give you an idea of the size or things like that, you know, here's an actual one. What can we learn from it? Now, there's a couple of downsides to using objects and models. Number one, difficult in an online setting. If I was trying to lead this lecture on the human heart in an online classroom, I'd have to hold it up to a camera. You wouldn't be able to physically handle the object, right? Hold it. That might not be so effective. If we were in a big auditorium and I held up the human heart, who knows if everybody would be able to see it? Is it appropriate to pass around? Probably not, you know. So there's some things here to consider. One of the things I would always recommend when using an object or a model is to practice with it. I hate being surprised with things on the fly, so my advice is always to practice with something. For example, the model of the human heart. I cannot remember what TV show it's from, but somebody is playing with a model. It's pretty similar to that. They take out one piece of it, the whole thing falls apart. Right? So if that happened to me as a speaker, now I have this bundle of pieces on my desk and I don't know how they go back together and I look like a dork, so my credibility is shot. What if I pulled out the actual human heart and it like was squishy and I couldn't handle the texture and I got a sick stomach and I'm like, I can't do this, right? Practice with your stuff before you present it to an audience. I promise it will be helpful, okay? So remember, objects and models. Now let's talk about some more visual type support. Let's talk about photographs. So photographs can be super effective. They're very easy to find. Anything that needs literal representation is well handled in a photograph. I'm trying to, sorry, I got lost in my notes. I want you to understand that as with most everything, you're going to hear me repeat it a lot, you'll want to consider the purpose of the presentation. So what I've got up here on the screen is California poppies. I hope most of you recognize the California poppy. I love them. I think they're beautiful. I think they're like crazy looking and interesting, and they just grow from nothing. They're the most beautiful weed ever. So if I wanted to show you all the different color varieties, if that was the purpose of my speech, the color varieties of the California poppy, a photograph would do just fantastic, right? So long as it was nice representation, it was big enough, it wasn't pixelated, things like that. A photograph would do a beautiful job at conveying what I wanted to convey. Now, what if I wanted to teach, the goal of my speech is not to talk about color. It's about to discuss the anatomy of the California poppy. Well, for that, I might use a diagram. A diagram is usually similar to a handout. It will show maybe a cross section like you see here. It'll show the details that maybe you can't see with the naked eye. This allows me to pass out information en masse, so I can give everybody a diagram sheet, right? I can't get everybody a California poppy and then teach you to dissect it and then open it up, hope everything is present and accounted for, and then teach it. It would be a lot, right? So the diagram might be the better way to go. A diagram is great for things like size, shape, structure, those types of lectures. That's what you would want to focus on. But what if the purpose of my speech is not to teach about the anatomy of the California poppy? What if I wanted to teach you about how widespread the California poppy was? Well, for that, I might use something like audio or video. This picture right here, this is actually a still frame from a drone. It's a drone footage and it's about 3 minutes long. And it's just scanning California wildflowers and poppies. And if you've ever had to speak for 3 minutes, you know how long 3 minutes is. They are everywhere during poppy season. They're beautiful, they're gorgeous, they cover the fields like this. And using a video would be a really great way for me to teach you that, because it would show you how vast and big these fields are, right? When you are using video to support your presentation, there's something, I got to give you a little pro tip here. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't seem to quite grasp, so I'm going to see how you do with it. When you are giving a presentation and one of your visual aids or your visual support materials is a video, you need to introduce what it is you want your audience to take away from it before you show it. Let me tell you why. A lot of folks, because we live in a very, I don't know, what's the word I want? Structured reality. That's not quite the right word. Because we're always looking for the punchline, the big reveal at the end. We're just sort of a theatrical society. A lot of folks will use video in their presentation, will watch the video, and then at the end, they'll say, now, did you see da 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 da? And the audience will say, no, I didn't, because I didn't know I was supposed to be looking for it. So when you use a video effectively, you need to say, I'm going to show you a video. And in this video, I want you to take note of da 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 da. That way your audience is already aware of what you need to get out of this video, and they can be looking for it. This is not Quentin Tarantino land. Don't surprise them at the end and say, you missed it, shock, no, introduce your video ahead of time, okay? Okay. Now, the final piece of visual presentation assistant I might use for my speech on the California poppy, I might use something like a map. A map is an excellent tool to help you convey, of course, size, location. Right here, what you're seeing is in all, I just noticed there's some random white text at the top of my slide. That's irritating. Oh, guys, you guys, so sorry. That was distracting. Every place in the world has what we call a hardiness zone. Basically, what is the climate of that place? And that helps us determine what kind of species can grow there. So if I told you that the California poppy can grow anywhere from a 9A to a 10A. I don't know if that's true. I'm just going to say it. That's kind of the dark gold to the very dark pinkish. And then I show you a map of Southern California. Would that help you understand how common and widespread the California poppy is? I hope so. They're everywhere. It doesn't make sense for me as a teacher if the goal is to talk about how widespread they are. I can't put you all in a bus and go show you, let's go to Barstow and look there. Let's go to LA and look there. We're going to go up to San Benito later and look there. No, that would be wildly ineffective as far as cost. It would be the longest, most boring bus drive ever. This is a much better way to demonstrate what I want you to get out of that, okay? Okay, fabulous. Photos, diagrams, videos, maps. Let's talk charts. I love me a good chart. There's a handful that I want you to be aware of. There are a few types of charts I see commonly used. The first one is a statistical chart. That's the one right under the word charts. You see probability, you see degrees of freedom. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Can you imagine if I tried to read that to you and I read it line by line and I was trying to teach you about some statistical significance. And I'm like, at the first degree of freedom at 0.95, we have 0.004% probability, right? Like die, kill me in a fire. I don't want to go to that speech. But as I mentioned earlier, if you put a chart up on the screen like this, let your audience visualize the data and then point out specifically what you want them to learn, well, then you have an effective visual aid, okay? So statistical charts. There's also sequence of steps charts. That one's on the left. Now, I took this chart right off the internet. I didn't even read what it's referring to, but you know what? I know how to do it because it tells me it's a sequence of steps chart. So what I know is that after I am an expert, I initialize a model, and then I will identify candidate models. I will evaluate candidate models. Is best candidate better? Yes or no? Yes. Well, then I will update the model and identify the candidate model. Do you see? Regardless of what it is, I know exactly what to do. So sequence of steps is a great way to help your audience visualize a process or a how-to. And then, of course, you have a decision tree. Decision trees are super fun. I love them. I use them all the time. Basically, when you have a decision tree, you have several variables that have to go into one big picture decision, essentially. So for this example, should I accept a new job offer? So that's your big question. Now, there are several minor decisions that have to be made that will feed into the bigger choice. And those are called nodes. You have average decision nodes, and you have a root node. The root node is like the make or break. And here in this image, it's the salary. Is the salary at least $50,000? That's gotta be, that's a hard line. That's my root node, yes or no. If the salary is at least $50,000, I have some minor decision nodes that I need to take into account. Number one, what's the commute? Is it more or less than an hour? How do I feel, yes or no? Is there any perks like free coffee or maybe employee parking or anything like that? Yes or no? And that'll lead me to my ultimate decision. So decision trees are great for if-then scenarios. Okay, I use them a lot. They're super fun. Okay, so those are charts, but there's also graphs. Okay, graphs show correlation between two things. They're super helpful for showing trends like growth or data. You can show, graphs as a single trend or relationships, between a variety of things. I've chosen this image because it cracks me up. This is a still from How I Met Your Mother. This is Marshall, played by Jason Segel. On the top image, he has a pie chart describing his favorite bars. And on the bottom, he has a bar graph describing his favorite pies. And what I love about graphs, I know it's called a pie chart, but it's actually a graph, because what a graph is a way to visualize data. Okay, so because a pie chart is actually visual, it should be pie graph. It's a long thing, okay? Just go with me on it. So when we look at this top image here, what we have is Marshall's favorite bars in percentage of awesomeness as a piece of a whole. So the whole pie is the whole circle. These different slices make up his favorite bars, and whichever one has the highest percent is the highest percentage of awesomeness and thus his favorite. Okay, so you can see McLaren's has 30% of the total, which makes it the most awesome bar. So you can see how things are relating to each other, right? Or of the whole favorite bars category, this is how it divides up. Now on the bottom, you have a bar graph describing pies. I love this one because it helps you just very, very clearly understand and see what Marshall's favorite pie is in percentage of tastiness. Unfortunately, I can't read the blue column there, or bar, I should say, but whatever it is, it clearly has the highest percentage of tastiness and is thus his favorite. What I love about this is if I were to offer Marshall a slice of whatever the blue one is and a slice of whatever the green one is, I have a pretty strong chance of getting him to take the blue one because I know it's the highest in percentage of tastiness. Okay, so visualizing data, using graphs, that's going to be your bread and butter. When you are presenting, you can also use things like people and animals, and they both have pros and cons. I think the pros and cons are equally that they are both awesome, but also wildly unpredictable. So let's talk about animals. Animals are unpredictable, yes. There are a few things to consider. Number one, your audience may have a weird fear or an aversion, or they may be allergic. You never know. I don't know why they went to the bird show if they're allergic to birds, but goodness, you never know. You may have regulations in wherever you're giving your presentation that won't allow you to have live animals, okay? Animals, in the vein of being unpredictable, they're kind of do their thing, even the best trained animals. I absolutely love going to see bird shows because I'm kind of a bird nerd. And there's one I go to every year starring Robert the Bruce. He's a big old grumpy owl. I love him so much. And one year I was watching the show. I've seen it 10 million times. Nothing was different other than Robert was done for the day. And so he flew to the top of a 20-foot tree, and they had to just stop the show because they didn't have a plan. They can't go on. They can't open up the other cages and let the other birds out while Robert is loose. So they just kind of stopped the show and shuffled us out and spent the rest of the day trying to get him out of the tree, which they did. But I like to think Robert was laughing the whole time. Think about what that would do to your presentation. Would it help? Probably not, okay? So yeah, be aware that animals are unpredictable. I want you to think about the purpose, again, of your presentation if you choose to use an animal. If you're giving a presentation on something common, like a house cat, do you really need to bring in a house cat that could cause so many problems? Or is there something better? Could you use a photograph or a video or even a diagram, right? Could you use any of that to better make your point? Now, moving on to people who are also awesome but unpredictable, there's a couple of things you see with people. First, when you are having a presentation and you call someone randomly from the audience, you are taking a risk, right? If you ask for a human helper, you don't know whose team they're on. They might try to ruin your presentation. They might try to make you look silly. That's why people plant people in audiences to make sure that that doesn't happen. So be aware of who you're asking to help, right? The other thing you need to consider is human beings, gosh, if you were doing a presentation on, I don't know, ballet moves, and you asked your friend to come and demonstrate the ballet moves, you're going to teach the moves, then they do the demonstration. What happens if they don't know it? or they do it wrong, or they don't show up for the presentation. I guess my big thing when using people as a visual aid or a visual support, always make sure you could do it without them. I've seen too many presentations go awry. So be aware there are pros and cons there too. Now, the most common, especially these days, most common types of support is going to be media, right? So things like dry erase boards or flip charts, using your computer, making a handout, things like that. Pros and cons to all of them. You want to choose the right type of visual. You want to make sure it's accomplishing the purpose that you are trying to get for. Think about dry erase boards. Super awesome when it comes to like coming up with stuff on the spot. Like I need to brainstorm something with my audience. This is great. Or I need to keep track of audience responses. That's great too. However, you know, there's not a lot of polish. Dry erase boards require you to turn your back on your audience, which is not always desirable. Okay. So, you know, if you need something pre-planned in advance for the purpose of your speech, that's not the one. Okay. Flip charts and poster boards. These are usually these days some of those big pads of paper on an easel. The biggest problem I see with those is that they just fall. I don't think I've ever seen one where somebody has it go well. You go to flip the page or rip the page off and the whole thing comes crumbling down. They're very low tech, right? So perhaps that's one of the advantages is that they are low tech. They're pretty easy to use, but you know, pros and cons. There are, of course, computer displays and presentation software, which I'm going to cover kind of bigger here in a second, but also handouts. Handouts are, you know, anything that you're going to pass out to your audience to have them hold or follow or use or interact with during your presentation. Pros and cons. The big one with handouts is that your audience will start playing with them instead of listening to you, and they'll start following or working ahead, right? Because they've got the handout, so they'll just start. I'm thinking of a specific example where a student gave a presentation on folding a paper airplane, and he gave out the pieces of paper way too early, and he said, "We're going to learn how to make paper airplanes." And almost at that moment, a terribly made paper airplane flew up right into his face because some other student had already used the handout for such. And he's like, well, okay, that's not going to work. So, you know, be careful. Your audience, we're all children at heart, I guess. They will play with whatever you give them. But let's talk a little bit more about computer displays or presentation software. This is like Prezi or PowerPoint or some of those types of materials that are visually pretty stunning, a little more technologically inclined, okay? One of my biggest pet peeves, I can't do it, is when people create a slide deck and then proceed to read it word for word. I can't do it because if all I needed to do was read the PowerPoint, then this shouldn't have been a presentation. This should have been, you email me the PowerPoint and I'll read it, okay? So one thing to remember, with most presentation aids, but particularly things like PowerPoint, they do not speak for themselves. If I can look through the PowerPoint and I don't need you to help me, then you did it wrong, okay? It should only enhance the things the speaker is saying. I've got Jack Black up here from School of Rock. I love his chalkboard right here. He's talking with the children about different genres of rock and roll. And what you can see is he's got some categories: punk, heavy metal, 80s, hard rock, and then he's got different bands that fit into those categories. Now, if I walked into this classroom, I could get the gist of what's going on with this board, but unless Jack Black is there to teach it to me, I'm not going to understand what qualifies Judas Priest as heavy metal over punk. I need Jack Black to explain the qualifications, maybe the genre specifics, any other big information I need to know. I'm going to rely on the speaker or the expert for that. And that's what I want you to use SlideWare for, is to enhance what you're already saying. So you can use slide decks to your advantage to show very cool special effects. I already showed you a couple. My Wonder Woman GIF where she's defending the bullets. We used Tony Stark just earlier in this deck. They can be great, right? Very helpful. Other effects include things like transitions between slides, very cool. So there's some really cool things you can do with a PowerPoint. It can also help you organize your notes. One of the things that I use when I present is presentation view. So you guys are seeing the big screen with my little bullet points, and I'm seeing not only that screen with my bullet points, but my notes for that screen, as well as my next slide so I can get ready to transition, okay? Very, very helpful for me when it comes to giving a presentation. So it will help you stay organized. You can customize them however you want to. You might put a bunch of superhero things in there for all you want to do, right? PowerPoint will also help create a runtime of your display. So basically, there's two components to runtime. Number one, as soon as I start presentation mode, PowerPoint starts a clock ticking, and I know how long my presentation is supposed to be, so I can keep an eye on that timer, and I know how much time I have. The other thing PowerPoint can do is that you can, if you're this good, I have yet to be this good, so go forth and conquer. You can time your slides. It will help you keep on track. So I can say, I need to speak about this slide for 3.5 minutes, and then automatically it'll go forward. And that guarantees you'll stay on time, and you get to decide, I want to spend a lot of time on this slide and a little time on that slide. I get a little extemporaneous. I tend to go down dirt roads. So that one's never been an advantage for me, but it could be for you, okay? Also, PowerPoint gives you the ability to create some of those cool other pieces like charts, graphs, and tables. You can put them right onto the slide. Now, there are, of course, some dangers. Presentation software like PowerPoint, it makes it super easy to create things like charts and graphs. You can copy and paste images. You can put animation on there. You can customize it. It's beautiful. But PowerPoint cannot structure your message for you. Basically, I can throw a bunch of slides together in any order I want and present them, and PowerPoint says okay, because it's a software, right? There's user error. So if you don't have organization and presentation skill, your message isn't going to be clear, and there's no point, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time on design with PowerPoint. They want it to look pretty, and they forget to work on the message behind it, the content. So make sure, like I said, that the visuals you provide are on top of what you're going to speak about, right? You should have more to say than slides. In fact, there's one week, I can't remember if it's this class, but I can speak for an hour, and I think I have 9 slides. And one of them's an intro and one of them's a wrap up. So 7 slides for an hour, okay? That is content over design, my friends, okay? And then finally, things can get a little complex. Sometimes you get focused on the visual and it's very exciting for your audience, but because it's fancy, you're taking away from your message. You really want to focus on the message. And when it comes to design and complex presentation, one thing I want you to be aware of is how much content is going on your slides, okay? Now, much more important than the method of delivery, the visual aid you use, is your audience's ability to see and understand the presentation aid. It has to be clear, cannot distract from the message, and all the time I was saying all of that stuff, you were probably not really listening because you were reading my slide. Okay. I told you this earlier about Frank. There's a couple of things you should know about Frank. Frank cannot listen and read at the same time. He has to give up one for the other. So while I was talking and this slide was up, you were either listening to me and ignoring the slide, or you were reading the slide and not hearing me. And that's what happens when you put too much content on a slide. You force the Frank in your audience's brain to choose. Okay. So pay attention to the amount of information you put on a slide. You want bullet points, single sentences or phrases are plenty. You want to make sure they're, 4 to 6 main points per slide. And I always suggest that people bring in slides one at a time. One of the things about having slides like this is even if you chose to read the bullet points rather than listen to me, that's totally fine. That was the point of the exercise. But you probably got to the end of the bullet points, right? Now, what if I was going to spend 20 minutes on this slide? Well, my audience is already ahead of me, which means they're super bored and I'm torturing them. I had a criminal justice class in college, and we would do case studies. It was one of my favorite classes. The problem was that the teacher would put all the details on the slide right when we started the case. So he'd pull up the slide, this murder, this unsolved, here's our evidence. What would you do? What should we look at? And then down at the bottom, it'd be like, it was solved in 1982 and here was the killer. And I'm like, well, I'm already ahead of you. So this class got boring because I know the answer. So if you bring your main points in one at a time, you'll be able to keep attention. Remember, people read pretty quickly, usually faster than people speak. So if they choose to read, they're going to get ahead of you. All right. Okay. Let's talk about selection of a visual aid. Whether you choose a handout, a poster board, a dry erase board, a PowerPoint, there's a couple of rules for you to follow. Number one, know your purpose. I don't know how many times I got to say it. I'm going to say it 92 more. Use it with purpose. Understand why you are choosing what you've chosen and that this is truly the best way to communicate what you want. Okay. Have a good reason. If you're going to use a slideshow, keep it brief. I have found that my magic number of slides is right around 35 for an hour. Unless, of course, it's that random lecture where I have 9 slides for an hour. It's usually about 35. That's about my timing. Less is more, usually. Keep in mind that your audiences, they want to recall your main points. They want to know, they want to take something away from your presentation. If you give them too much, they won't be able to, okay? So keep it brief when you can. And then, of course, match your audience. Some audiences can handle big fat charts and holding a human heart and all of that. And some audiences, that is not going to go well. So take a minute to analyze your audience, who you're speaking to, and figure out what might work best for them. Now, when you're designing your visual aid, couple of things, rules of thumb and best practices. Make everything large enough that everyone in the room can see it, even the very back seat. I've gone as far as projecting my PowerPoint onto the screen and then walking to the back of the classroom and sitting in different seats, that kind of thing, to make sure everybody has access to it. Keep your design simple. I use the same format and template every single week for my slides because it's easy, it's basic, it helps you contain this information into this one visual design. I keep the text very, very clear. No cursive in my class, okay? Because I want you to be able to see the simpleness of the design. Your text talks about the rule of 7. I love the rule of 7. If you are unsure how much goes on a slide, the rule of 7 is your favorite thing. No more than 7 lines, and each line has no more than 7 words. If there's more required, use your words verbally to explain it, but only put 7 lines with 7 words on each line. Okay. I recognize not every single one of my sentences, even on this slide, follows that rule, but it's a good guideline for you. Okay. Use only horizontal typeface or print. Don't use sideways fonts. That gets confusing. Keep it up while you're discussing it. If you're going to change topics, change your slide. If you're done talking about it and you don't have another slide, take it down. Okay. And then, of course, practice. Always practice. Don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you cannot get it wrong. And that is your week. So let's talk really, really quickly about the main takeaways for you to study. Supporting materials are super important, and they serve 3 distinct purposes. You clarify ideas to make things more interesting and to offer proof of any claims you make. There are several types of verbal support: definitions, examples, quotations, etc. Make sure when you are citing your sources, you are doing it ethically and enhancing your credibility by citing credible sources. There are several types of visual aids, things like objects, models, photographs, diagrams, charts, graphs, PowerPoints, etc. They all have their place and they all have pros and cons. But a successful presenter will make a plan very carefully. They will emphasize content over design. They will have simplicity and clarity. All of the presentation aids you design should be meaningful. They should be suited to the point they illustrate. They should be pretty basic, nothing too fancy. And then, of course, always, always, always practice and be familiar with your visual aid to avoid anything surprising. All right, folks. So that's it for this week. I am hoping that you get as jazzed about visual aids as I do. I don't know why I love them. I just find the whole idea of looking at a topic and then like, how best can I teach this? Oh, what would be the coolest? What would be most effective? I'm a nerd. It's a thing. Okay. All right, friends. Holler at me if you need help with this week's content. Feel free to drop by office hours, send me an email, send me a text. Holla at your girl. That was dorky. Get in touch with me. I'm here for you. Let me know how I can help, and I will see you next week.